No, we don't have a building. The whole airport is a museum. It was a Marine Corps Air Station in World War II. So there's lots of history here. But I wanted to introduce you to our speaker, Jackie Payne. He first soared at the Air Force Academy in 1971. Well, that was it. He was hooked. In 1983, he got his gold and diamond altitude legs in a I-26 in the Tehachapi wave. And
right over Mojave.
right, you know when you see those lenticulars, and Jim Payne is going, gotta get out there, and I'm like, I gotta get under the bed. I don't like to fly in that. But that's when the wave is working, and he always tells me, think wave, and I, anyway, on September 2nd, 2018, the Airbus Perlan mission 2 claimed its third world record in a fabulous week of high altitude Patagonia soaring. Was over 76,000 feet in a glider. It's just mind-boggling. The Airbus Perlan Mission 2 team completed 7 stratospheric flights in 2019 and reached 65,000 feet on September 17th. And it was just 600 feet short of being the second highest soaring flight ever. This heroic effort by the entire team demonstrated that even in non-optimal conditions, the Perlan II can still soar high in the stratosphere. And apparently there was some crazy weather phenomenon that kept the glider from going higher. But this next year, we'll do it. Jim worked many years, as you know, at Edwards, where he was an F-16 XL, that's for extra large, test pilot, an instructor at the test pilot school, and he worked at Northrop Grumman, who was the manager of the Global Hawk flight test team. He piloted the first flights of the Northrop Grumman Firebird II and the Perlan II. Please welcome Jim and Jackie Payne.
Thanks, Kathy. It's always a pleasure to be here, and it's always fun to talk about the Perlan project and what we've done with our pressurized cell plant. So, everybody see the screen? Okay. So, what I'll talk a little bit about today is how we got here, building the Perlan II and flying the Perlan II. The project, we're trying to innovate, create new things, and some of the systems on the Perlan II are pretty innovative. We're trying to explore the atmosphere. Aaron Volson is the one who got interested in the polar night jet, aka the polar vortex, which causes strong winds in the stratosphere, which allow us to fly high. And right now we're doing a lot of inspiration. As this talk is an attempt to inspire. I see a young lady back there. Welcome. And you can fly a glider when you're 14. Go solo. So,
Right here.
Another one back there. But, those of us that are a little bit older, of course, we can do mentoring. I was at the Air Force Academy recently and just talked to the cadets. There's a lot of awesome young people out there. Told them you haven't learned about aviation or science, technology, and math. And of course, we need a lot more engineers as we look towards the future. So any mentoring you can do to help people become interested in science and math and flying and soaring is a wonderful thing. So when I was a cadet, I became interested in high altitude glider flight. In fact, I wrote my paper when I was a senior about flying a sailplane and breaking the world altitude record. In 86, 87, Test Pilot School had a project called Soar Eagle, and the goal of the project was to break the world altitude record at the time. At the time, the record was 46,000 feet, and we had a sailplane and we put a pressure suit system in. And it was quite a project, a lot of fun. And I was able to fly to 42,200 feet, took off from Edwards, high point, well, we released near Indian Current, high point was up by Lone Pine, and we made a glide all the way back to Edwards with the airplane. At 40,000 feet, the lift was like 500 feet a minute, and you get to 42,000 feet, the lift dies off, a little bit of turbulence. I spent 45 minutes up there looking around trying to find the mountain wave and went higher. And we looked at the sounding from the balloon launch at Vandenberg. The tropopause was at 42,000 feet, and the winds died off above. And you really need a continuation in the wind speed to propagate the wave to high altitude. So that and other experiences, we kind of decided that, you know what, you got to find that rare day when the tropopause is extremely high if you're going to break the record. Later on, Bob Harris set a record and he made 49,000 feet, which in an unpressurized sailplane without a pressure suit is pretty risky. But on that particular day, the tropopause on the Vandenberg sounding was above 50,000 feet. So we kind of thought, oh no, we're really limited. But in the meantime, I've done a lot of gliding, and that's what got me into the Perlan project. From Einar Einevoltsen and Steve Clausen started the project, they asked me to help out. And I'll comment here, pilots are some of the best meteorologists because they're involved in micrometeorology all the time. So soaring pilots, you're looking for thermals, you're looking for mountain wave, you're looking for ridge lift, and as such you experience actual meteorology. Now this is a graphic of the mountain wave, and as Kathy mentioned, when the winds are strong out of the west, for instance here at Mojave, you see the air sink on the downside of the mountain, and then it rebounds. In this zone right here, you can find strong lift. In this zone right here, you have extreme turbulence. That's called the rotor zone. And for instance, I remember one day I flew from Cal City. You take your tow out of Cal City. From Cal City, you have to fly through the rotor to get to the wave. And going through the rotor is kind of like flying inside of a washing machine. But the amazing thing is, in the length of a tow rope, which is 200 feet, the air goes from the most severe turbulence you can imagine to the most laminar air you can imagine. I mean, it's totally smooth, not one little ripple. And I remember one day I got off tow as we got into the smooth air, and I looked down, and the averager on the variometer, which tells us how fast we're climbing, was showing 2,800 feet a minute up. And then you just stay in this zone right here and climb. Now this graphic here shows what happens in the lower level of the atmosphere. Here's your troposphere, here's a tropopause, up above is a stratosphere. And if you go to the polar regions where the polar night jet occurs, the wave can actually go much higher. On this side here are some examples of clouds. So these are lenticular clouds that Kathy mentioned, and then this is a rotor cloud. Rotor cloud looks more like a cumulus cloud, but I've been here at Mojave on days when the wave was working. If you look at the cloud on the leading edge, you can see the cloud forming. Look at the trailing edge, you can see it dissipating. You know, the wind's blowing 50 or 60 knots, and the cloud's not moving. That's because it's forming and dissipating. Einar Einevoltsen saw this graphic when he was working at Grobe in Germany. 23 kilometers is like 75,000 feet. This was taken from a research airplane which had a LiDAR. And they actually made a transit from Finland all the way to Iceland. And as they crossed over Sweden, the particles in the atmosphere that the LiDAR bounced off of showed this mountain wave at the extremely high altitude. So he did more research to find out what might be causing it. And it turns out there's something called the polar night jet, or the polar vortex, and it causes strong winds at altitude around the pole in the northern hemisphere and the southern hemisphere in their wintertime. And you know, if you go down to Argentina, Jackie will talk about the geography a little bit later, but El Calafate, where we made these high flights, is here in southern Argentina, and down there the westerlies, low altitude, cause tropospheric wave, which pushes on the stratospheric winds and causes a wave in the stratosphere, causes us to go high. This graphic right here, the little X right here, is where Calafate is. Here's another graphic. What happens basically is when a pole goes into the night, you know, at the pole, the exact pole, you only have one day 186 days of daylight and 186 days of darkness. When it's in the darkness, it gets very cold. The air starts moving towards the equator. Because of Coriolis effect, it causes it to become western. And at high altitude, we end up having strong lift. So Aner got paired up with Steve Fawcett. They modified a DG 505 so they could put pressure suits in it. And in 2006, they flew it to almost 51,000 feet to claim the world altitude record. But on the way down, they got very cold, and the pressure suit is very stiff. Above 35,000 feet, the pressure suit starts adding pressure in it to keep the partial pressure of oxygen inside the suit equal to sea level. And by the time you get to 51,000 feet, it's really stiff, so it's hard to move. And the glove is inflated. It's kind of hard to push buttons to change the avionics. So on the way down, they decided that they would build a pressurized sailplane. The requirements that they set were, initially they wanted to go to 100,000 feet, but if you do the math, the wing loading has to be too low, and the airplane has to be too big. So they set us a desired design goal of 90,000 feet. Steve wanted to go along, so they made it a two-seater. And because of the pressure suit being so stiff, they wanted a shirt sleeve and wire. Optimized for climb, so you can get away with a fixed wheel. And the airfoil was optimized for 60,000 feet. Unfortunately, the airfoil that works at 90,000 feet is simply different than the airfoil that works well at sea level. And then Reynolds numbers effects, which kind of is a number that describes the viscous nature of the air. Also, about 60,000 feet is where all the forecasts said the lift might be the weakest. And also, the true airspeed can be very high, so you have to build a strong airplane that's going to be flutter-free. Speaking of true airspeed, the stall speed on the Perlan is 38 knots indicated airspeed. It's got a little light wing loading. At sea level, the VNE is 121. As we go up in altitude, we start having Mach effects. Our Mach limit is 0.62 Mach number. When you get to 90,000 feet, the stall speed is going to be roughly 40 knots because of earlier separation. And VNE is 54 knots indicated. So you got this small airspeed range. If you extrapolate where both of these cross, they meet at 96,000 feet. But if you go to 96,000 feet, you don't have any extra capacity to maneuver. So for practical purposes, we limited ourselves to 90,000 feet, which gives us a little bit of ability to turn so that we can stay in the wave. When you're flying in these waves, you end up with a line of rising air, and the wind speed is typically stronger than your true airspeed. So we end up zigzagging back and forth like this as we go up. And so you need to be able to turn when you get to the ends of your zigzags. Well, at 90,000 feet, your true airspeed is 6.7 times your indicated airspeed. So if you're flying at 54 knots indicated, your actual true airspeed is like 375 knots. So you're going pretty fast. Structures, the airplane is strong for a glider, plus 6 Gs to -4. Of course, you don't want any flutter being an uncontrolled oscillation of the structure. And the cabin is built to spacecraft standards, so it has a safety factor of 3 instead of 1.5, like your wing spar or other parts. Kind of a graphic of the airplane. It's got 84-foot wingspan. We've been flying at about 1,960 pounds. Max gross is 2,000 pounds. Being a glider, we don't have a power source, so the pressurization comes from an air bottle. We just have a scuba bottle, and the cabin is designed to have very light leaks in it, very small leaks. If any leaks do occur, we just add air from the scuba bottle to keep the pressurization where we want it. We discovered early on that when systems get cold, they tend to fail. So we have a heater on, for instance, the oxygen regulator and the air regulator and our cameras. We even have heaters on the battery. It turns out if the battery gets too cold, it has a large decrease in capacity. And you actually come out ahead if you use a little bit of the battery to heat the battery. You don't lose as much as it costs to heat the battery. We have a drogue chute in the tail of the airplane for emergency descent, and we also in the equipment bay have a ballistic recovery chute, which can parachute the whole airplane down in case we have a problem. We figured that the hatches are small enough that if you had a parachute on your back, it'd be really difficult to get out, especially if you had some sort of structural failure in the airplane was gyrating. So use the BRS to get around that. The airplane is highly instrumented. We have 22 Arduinos, which are really small computers on a circuit card. Those are all integrated to take data from our various sensors, temperature sensors, pressure sensors, and so on. Strain gauges and control position, control forces. That's all integrated. We put in a telemetry stream. We can display it in the cockpit, or we can send it to the ground. The guys on the ground can study what's going on. So the engineers are actually additional pilots, if you will, because just like when NASA's flying something or Edwards is doing a flight test, they have a control room with engineers. They're doing the same thing. The pressurization uses scuba air, so it's 21% oxygen in the cabin. And in fact, if you end up with an oxygen leak, because the cabin is so small, you end up getting high concentrations. Early on, we had to deal with some of those. We solved that problem. It's lightly pressurized, so at high altitude, the cabin is 16,500. That's enough pressurization. We don't have to worry about DCS unless we have a big decompression. And it reduces the weight a little bit because you don't have to have such a strong structure.
On CO2.
We're using a rebreather system,
Oh,
and the rebreather system has a CO2 scrubber in it.
sulfur line,
It's a what?
sulfur line. That's a CO2 equivalent.
And now
I'm not
this
sure what the
is,
specs are.
I remember what the scrubber is. It's like it's a calcium compound.
Calcium carbonate.
There you go, calcium carbonate. And so this little canister right here, it has a cartridge in it. It's about that big around, about that long. And it's supposed to be good for like 20 hours of CO2 scrubbing. So the rebreather is kind of unique. You know, most oxygen systems, like the oxygen system in F-16, has one hose that comes in. So you breathe in and you exhale, and that is the way you get your supplemental oxygen. That system actually kind of wastes oxygen because you don't use all of the oxygen that you breathe in. Where in the rebreather system, you have two hoses. So when you breathe out, the hose goes back through the scrubber, it goes through the counter lung, and it goes in a loop, and the only oxygen you use is what you metabolize. So it's a really efficient system. The other upside is the moisture in your breath would normally get on the inside of the windows and the inside of the cabin. Because the system is closed, you end up with 100% humidity in the loop. You don't dehydrate as fast, and you don't get the moisture in the cabin. So it's a win-win for us. Drogue chute, we tested it in reef mode. It's 15 feet in diameter, which allows us to come straight down in the event of a serious emergency. And the BRS, if we ever have, knock on wood, a serious problem, we can come down under parachute. Lots of ground tests. For instance, the wing spar. Take the wings, build a structure so you can hang them upside down and put weights on. In this case, we're using bags of cement. And the wings are pretty flexible, being carbon fiber. So you can see here the bend of the wings. We did extensive ground vibration tests. ATA in San Diego helped us out. They put accelerometers all over the airplane, and they just vibrate the airplane, and they can see what the modes are. For instance, you don't want the wing bending mode and the fuselage twisting mode to occur at exactly the same frequency. Because if they do, if something causes the wings to bend at that frequency, it causes the fuselage to twist, and the two kind of interfere with each other, and you get unbounded oscillations, and it tends to break the structure. So we did that, and from that they forecast how the airplane is going to behave at altitude. And then you go out and fly. We got exciters in the wingtips, and so we can excite the airplane at 2 hertz to 30 hertz. We measure the damping, how fast the frequency oscillations die out. And as long as those at, say, 40,000 feet agree with the model, then you're pretty confident you go to 45,000 feet, and if at 45,000 feet it agrees, and go to 50, you just keep doing steps like that. If you get to a point where the model and the results of your test don't agree, then you need to kind of figure out why, and maybe change the structure if it's trending in the wrong direction. Okay, so exploring the stratosphere, we made first flight in Redmond, Oregon on September 23rd, 2015. And we've had 4 campaigns to Argentina now. Each campaign, the first one, we had some issues with shipping. Somebody opened up the container at some custom stop and didn't put the trailer back in the container correctly, and it was damaged. But we got to 54,000 feet in 2017, 76,000 in 2018. And this year, the winds aloft during the time that we were there were less than they were the year before. The polar vortex had something called sudden stratospheric warming occur, and that caused the wind speed to be less. So we only got to 65,000 feet this past year. Jackie is our chief of logistics. She's going to talk about how we get the airplane there and back, which is a huge exercise in itself. And she's also going to talk a little bit about Patagonia. Patagonia is one of those places we've never visited. It's a place.
All right. So the first question is, who's shipped anything with Amazon Prime? Raise your hand. Raise your hand. Who shipped anything overnight? Paid a little extra? I would kill to have Amazon Prime or overnight in Argentina. It's really, really hard. If you don't take it with you, you don't have it. There is no FedEx, no UPS, no DHL. The country of Argentina has egregious customs laws. If you could buy something in Argentina that, let's say I pay $100 for in the US, you'll be lucky to buy it for $150. And we are extremely remote. So, if we need it, we take it with us. If you need a spare, you take it with you, or 2 spares. So on the rebreather system, we have 4 plus spares, and by the end of this campaign, we had 4 and 0 spares, because we used all those little delicate pieces, everything we needed. Batteries. There's no motor, so everything is heated with the batteries that Jim's talking about. You take spare batteries with you. Because if something goes wrong with your 100 amp hour battery, you're not going to get another one there. So we take it all, we make sure we fill this container. The glider goes in the trailer for security, safekeeping in the shipping. And then the container goes. I'm going to have to use my right hand, sorry. I'm not. The container goes there on a truck, and off it goes.
Just one container?
Yeah. It's real close to $15,000 one-way shipping. 2 containers would be twice that. And so that's why we really pack it in, pack it tight, but we don't take the kitchen sink. Everything but not the kitchen sink. So it goes from Minden up here, comes down to the LA area, usually Long Beach, gets on a boat, then it switches boats because there is no boat that goes all the way, so you have to have at least 2 boats for the equipment. And that's over 7,000 miles on the water. And it's winter time as you go south of the equator, the water can be very disturbed.
Does somebody make the whole trip with the container?
No, we pack it up and say goodbye, and customs puts a little
Kiss it
tiny
goodbye.
seal on it. I mean, it's a piece of wire. There's no lock. Yeah.
And then you pray.
There's times we wish we could go.
Once it gets here, to, it's near Valparaiso. It goes on another boat, sorry, on another truck, and comes through the Andes Mountains. The tunnels are 10,000 feet high. And yes, we have waited on the Pacific coast for days while the blizzard has finally stopped and they've been able to plow the roads. I mean, it's winter and it's very, very rugged conditions. But then right here on the border, we have Mendoza, and we clear customs there, and finally can take control of our container back. And it goes on, continues its way, and it's really taking 3 sides of a rectangle. Why would we ship it 3 sides of a rectangle? Why would we not travel the shorter distance?
Roads.
Well, it's winter time, and the roads are not all paved. So the area is solid glacier from here to here, and that's at least probably 500 miles. I mean, it's a lot of ice there. It's called the National Glacier Park. We are here on the south shore of this particular lake. It's called Lago Argentino, and there's one other glacier-fed lake. That's about 60 miles from here to here, but if you're driving, you come all the way around. The second lake is Lago Vidama, and it has beautiful, very spectacular mountains. I'll show you that here in a bit. But what we have on our lake is glaciers right here on this end of it. The big glacier is Perico Moreno. It's one of the few glaciers that is still growing in this day and age. It's huge, almost 20 miles long, 3 miles across. Where it meets the lake, because you know it's melting into the lake, or icebergs calving into the lake, it's a 200-foot wall, but compared to 20 miles, it looks like a little thin ribbon. But it will form next picture. It will form as it pushes down. This is granite, Magellan Peninsula, and it pushes against it and it forms an ice dam. So this part of the lake and this arm of the lake hit different heights, and at the most extreme, it's an 80-foot difference of heights on the lake. Well, that kind of pressure, but I mean 80 foot compared to 200 feet, but that kind of pressure undermines the ice dam and it will collapse. You never exactly know. When it happened a year ago, it was in the middle of the night, and so there weren't any cameras rolling. But like 3 years before that, when it happened, there's big cameras rolling. You can find it on YouTube, and it's pretty spectacular to see. And it's a lake tsunami. I mean, 80 foot of water coming right out at you. So this is the 200-foot little edge of going there. But under the water, it's 300 feet. Okay, this is a big boy. They call it the Great White. And when a girlfriend and I had finished our morning chores in the hangar, she and I decided we were going to go out to the glacier. It's about a 30-mile drive. And I noticed, I'm giving this away, I noticed this pretty severe crack right here. So Jim and I went a couple of days later, and I said, I'm not leaving until that thing cracks off. And Jim just looks at me like, bigger than a boat, a tour boat that carries 100 people on it. Pretty good size. So the next lake up, which is, like I say, about 60 air miles between them, is Lake Vidama, and it has the town of El Chatan, and it has Mount Fitzroy. So if this mountain skyline kind of looks a bit familiar, the Patagonia clothing line from here in the U.S. has this as their symbol. And it's glorious. Mount Fitzroy is just unique and spectacular. This spire right here is Cerro Torre, and it is one of the 10 hardest climbs on planet Earth because it's really, really sharp and steep. And then right here at the top, it has a mushroom cap of ice on it. So as you climb, you take your crampons and, of course your ropes with you, and then you kind of, I don't know how to do it. You kind of go a little bit inverted, and then you're putting your crampons on your boots, and then you keep climbing. Pretty tough. Not for me. That is not my bucket list. But we take the team there. Sometimes there's a lot of cloud, can't see it at all. Sometimes it's just crystal clear blue, so it kind of, depends on the weather of the time. South of our area, El Calafate, is, it's actually in Chile, but it's, I don't know, about the same, about 60 miles south, air miles. You drive a long way to get there. And this is Torre de España, which is, when TripAdvisor kind of put out a survey of what would people think was the 8th wonder of the world, the first 7 have already been locked in, then Torre de España won for the 8th wonder of the world. It's glorious, so of course you take the team to that. And on non-flying, you gotta understand. Okay. So beautiful, and what is really unique to me is the rock is dramatically different. Okay, the difference in the coloration, coming from different geological structures. A little bit further south than that is the end of the world. You have Ushuaia. Has the Beagle Channel separating it from mainland. It's not an island exactly, but it's close. And this is Cape Horn at the very southern tip of, and it's the closest thing, because from Antarctica, there's an arm that reaches out, really looks like an extension of the Andes to me, but anyway, arm that reaches out, then there's a bunch of water, there's great, you can take a cruise from Ushuaia to Antarctica and cruise around, or you can just take a little cruise and be there in the Beagle Channel and see the penguin. We did. We had some friends there. Aviation is a small world, so we had some friends there that run a helicopter company, and so they took us after one of our world records. They took us up to the top of the glacier at the end of the world, so that we could celebrate going high. And they have other, fun things to do, dog sledding and other things to do. Because Patagonia is so isolated, the animals, like in Australia, have developed uniquely. So, of course, you have condors, huge birds. I mean, a 6-foot wingspan is nothing. That is not a big condor. There are guanacos, which are kind of like the long neck of a llama. There's choicays, which are like ostriches or emus. And there's flamingos. You're not going to believe these, but it's not going to be Photoshopped. These are going to be real pictures. So we have the condor flying in the air and on the ground. We think they're on the ground because it's eaten so much, it's now over gross weight and it can't get off. I'm pretty sure that's why they kind of walk around. There's a condor flying over the Pico Moreno Glacier. Here's a herd of the guanacos. They're foraging, and long neck, really long eyelashes, which I think is to keep blowing dust out of their eyes. That's why I think it's developed that way, but don't know for sure. The choicays, right here, if they're running, and they can run pretty fast. We paced one on a dirt road one time, and it was going what?
35 kilometers per hour.
35 kilometers per hour. This bird was just, it wasn't flying. It was running. But as soon as they stop, that boulder and the body of the choicay, you can't tell the difference. So they're very camouflaged. Again, cute face. They're so cute. Caracara bird, and there's another condor picture. And there's flamingos. They absolutely do survive in the ice. There's a flock of them, and they all kind of walk around in the shallow water, trying to keep it open so it doesn't all ice over. These, they're there every winter. They come to Lago, Argentina. And that's my contribution to the team. I actually do logistics besides shipping it down there. I got to make sure there's, for a team of 20 people, I take care of the lodging, the rental cars, the clothing, the team clothing that we wear, and it goes just on and on from there.
And the blog.
Oh, and there's, yeah, and then I try to tell our story. So there's a blog, photos, and great stuff. But everybody contributes to the team in a different manner. Okay? Yeah, I'm a pilot, but I'm not an adventuresome pilot. I really like to see, if I'm in a sailplane, I really want to know where I'm going to land. And I don't want to get too far from that. That's my personality. Okay? And with our 182, I'm willing to get a little further away. But then I have that, motor.
I understand.
But Jim likes to go far and go fast.
So next up, I have a video which shows us taking the subplane out of the hangar and flying in Argentina.
Oh, nice. She said.
We crawl in through the hatch. Our oxygen mask on so we can pre-breathe. Hatch comes inside, and we do a pressurization check. Past 2 years we've towed with egret. Egret actually is a pretty amazing tow plane. We're averaging about 1,200 feet a minute up to 28,000. We've made tows as high as 47,100, which would be a world record if there was a world record for highest tow. Tow camera footage from 76,000 feet.
Wow.
Our control room. And coming back to land. In the aft part of the airplane, we have a science bay, so we're taking several instruments with us every time we fly. We carry CubeSats, which are these little experiments that kids have built in schools. We also use weather balloons to verify the forecast. The forecasts in the southern hemisphere are not near as good as the ones in the northern hemisphere because there's many fewer stations that observe what the actual conditions are. So the models don't have the initial conditions that they need in order to be as accurate as they are in the northern hemisphere. So weather balloon actually turns out to be a valuable tool for us. We have what we call a virtual cockpit when we fly. And basically we take our telemeter data and it goes to a website and it shows our position on a moving map and it shows some flight information such as altitude and airspeed and the winds and some of the status of our oxygen and air and the battery. When we first got to Argentina, because they don't have radar, they were concerned about where the balloon was going. So the same person that made our virtual cockpit for us, he also made a virtual balloon cockpit. So now you see a little graphic here, the balloon almost always, on a wave day, the winds are strong enough that it always makes it to the Atlantic Ocean. When we're trying to fly high, we like to see a wind gradient where the winds gradually increase in speed as we go to altitude. This was taken from our balloon data on August 4th, 2017. And the winds at 100,000 feet were 205 knots on that particular day. And this is pretty representative of what we see on a good day with stratospheric waves. On our flight in 2017, El Calafate being here.
Can you go back just one thing? At 35,000 feet, you see that big difference in the wind in that area. So that's right at the tropopause. So it just messes up at the tropopause and then reestablishes once you get above that. So
It
that's.
doesn't always do this. This is, but this is an example of what can happen. Again, this graphic is showing the winds aloft on the day that we flew to 54,000 feet. You can see the wind is circling the South Pole and pretty strong over El Calafate still. Another interesting graphic, this is the equator, this is the South Pole, and this is the atmosphere. Of course, the scale is not the same. But you can see at latitudes such as Mojave, the jet stream tends to not have strong winds above it. But if you go further towards the pole, you can see that there are strong winds aloft. Again, this is in the winter time at the pole, and it's due to this polar night jet phenomenon. This is a route of flight from 2017. We took off from El Calafate. We towed to Cerro Buenos Aires, climbed up to about 28,000 feet here, used 7,000 feet to go forward to an area where the wind looked good. Got to the 30,000 foot range there. There were some good clouds down here, so he came down here and ended up getting to 54,000 feet in this area right here. These little blobs here is where we're doing our zigzags back and forth as we climb. This is what it looks like from the rear cockpit. We display the tail camera. We're flying now with a Verb 360 camera, which allows us to look all around the airplane. So you want to look down at the clouds or the ground, you can look down and look behind the airplane. Because of our small windows, it's really nice to be able to look at the clouds as we're flying. We have a moving map display, which is really helpful when we're trying to stay in the wave. As you get higher and higher and higher, the references on the ground that you might use the station keep are so far away that they're essentially useless. So we use the graphic to stay where we are. We have an attitude display, airspeed and altitude as we climb. This little display here is our life support systems display. On that display, we can display data from our instrumentation system, and of course, there's safety information we put on there, like oxygen and air pressures. The view from the front cockpit normally frosts up pretty bad. On these high flights, we saw minus 105 degrees Fahrenheit as we went through the tropopause. And in the cabin, there's a huge temperature gradient. The sunny side is warmer, and the shady side might be close to 0 Fahrenheit. We always get frost on the top of the canopy. Typically, again, we're facing west, so the sun's on the north. The north side of the airplane stays warmer, and the windows are easier to keep frost-free than on the downwind side. We kind of give up on the shady windows, keeping the frost off of them. 54,000 feet in 2017. Here's the altitude trace we released from tow right here. See our initial climb, the altitude losses went forward. The wave was pretty good in the second, or as we moved forward to about 30,000 feet, and then it kind of eased off. We did a bunch of test points, and then we climbed to level 540. Of course, coming back to the airport is always easy.
Yeah.
This is Capcom, our ground control, so they've got the displays of all our flight instrumentation. And this is one of our interns. We've had 2 interns that have come to Argentina with us that are now working for Airbus. This is the intern Oris that created the virtual cockpit for us. An outstanding gentleman. Here's an example of virtual cockpit. This is the moving map, and it shows some of our telemeter data. And if you're interested in watching future flights, if you sign up, you go to our website and sign up, and we'll send out a message whenever we fly. Or if you're following us on Twitter, you get a Twitter message. From 54,000 feet, the sky's starting to get dark, and you can see the curvature of the Earth.
That is so awesome.
And in 2017, we were having troubles with flat tires. Look at this picture here. He landed with a flat tire. Basically, in the cold weather, the air was leaking out of the tire. Michelin gave us, they got a new 10-ply tubeless tire that we're using, and we've since solved that problem. And we made it to Guinness. In 2018, that's when egret became important to us. This is a turboprop U2 equivalent that the Germans built in the 80s. It was designed to look into East Germany, and then the wall came down, of course, and so they canceled the program, but there's 5 of them in existence. It has been a fantastic tow plane for us. First high tow, we're passing about 25,000 feet, and it starts making a contrail. I said on the radio, it's conning. Guys in the control room didn't understand conning, so Jackie had to explain it to them. This is a video taken from the tail of the egret. See the little snap right there? That's the rope shedding ice from the rope. But that was taken at release.
Who owns the airplane?
It's a company called AV Experts. They're in Texas.
So they have
They
to
usually
fly
carry
down there for
payloads
you?
for the DoD, so, pardon me? It's a single seater, so they ferry it down and back.
It's a long ferry.
A long ferry. It's expensive, but we've discovered that the tropospheric wave causes a stratospheric wave. But very often at the tropopause, they're not perfectly lined up with each other. Making that transition is really difficult. If you tow it above 40,000 feet, you tow directly to the stratospheric wave. So it saves us about an hour in time when we're trying to climb, and it helps us find the stratospheric wave. So if you really want to get into the stratospheric wave on a regular basis, it's better to just tow the egret. Excellent tool.
Is that the same aircraft that sent it down for years?
Yes.
Okay.
So on the day we flew to 76,000 feet, the forecast said it'd be good down south. It wasn't, so we ended up towing to here, and this is where we got the high altitude. If you look at the FAI website, for gliders, they've changed the rules in the last 10 years. Used to be they used pressure altitude exclusively, but with GPS being a little bit more accurate, especially at very high altitude, they actually use the GPS altitude. The altimeter said flight level 761 when we came down. GPS said 74,334. So that's the official record based on GPS. We released here, went to 65,000 feet, did a bunch of flutter test points, did a bunch of other flutter test points approaching 75,000 feet, top was 76. Also did some high-speed flutter test points on the way down, and landed. The flight was about 5.5 hours long.
You actually had very good lift still with that 76,000 feet. If I remember.
We still had very good lift, and in fact, we're doing our test points, and we're having to leave the lifting zone to keep from getting too high for our test altitude. That's how strong the lift was.
Wow.
It was absolutely spectacular. A view from inside, again, the window on the sunny side is one we can see out of. The left side is kind of frosted over. Again, flight level 760. The highest I've seen for sure. Short clip from the tail camera. Flight level 761 here.
See the curvature.
Yeah, what you see in the picture is what you see out the window. It's pretty spectacular. This was taken from the rear cockpit on one of our record flights. Again, you can see the tail camera, the movie map display. I normally fly with a shield on the hatch just to keep the radiation down. This window's frosted over on the sunny side. The hatch is relatively free of frost.
That's the lake.
This is Lake Vidima, and remember Jackie talked about Mount Fitzroy? Mount Fitzroy is right there.
Wow.
It's barely peeking out of the clouds. So we've now flown the 10 highest glider flights with the Perlan
Wow.
in the stratosphere. We've expanded our flight envelope. We've flown inside of the blue line here. We've had a 6.6 hour flight. The airplane's designed to go 8 hours. Given the lift rates and stuff, we've been flying a lot of 5-hour flights. Collected a lot of science information. To me, the most important thing is to prove that the wave in the stratosphere actually exists. And we've kind of documented the locations of it, the strength of it, and so on. We looked at temperatures quite a bit, radiation, ozone, dust particles, and CubeSats. I mentioned schools have made these smaller experiments. We carried about a dozen different CubeSats for
Oh,
various
that's
schools.
great. And how old are the children?
The youngest is, what, first grade?
Oh, kindergarten.
Kindergarten. Well, I love it.
On kindergarten, when you're teaching the scientific method, okay, now, make your 5-year-old brain working here.
Yes.
How are you gonna prove there's anything going on as you get higher and higher? And they use big marshmallows.
Oh.
So the question is, will the marshmallow expand or will it freeze? And how are you going to know? So they tie a thread belt around it to show if it's expanded at all, and it does expand, and then it freezes and it comes down and it's still frozen, so you can see the expansion of the marshmallow. But that's the 5-year-old CubeSat experiment. And I tell you, we have to keep that CubeSat away from the pilots because they're all the time wanting to get in there and eat those marshmallows.
Because they think like a pilot.
Uh-huh.
I'm sorry.
Theory says that the air in the lifting zone of the wave is going to be cooler than the air in the sinking zone of the wave, but what we're seeing is a much greater temperature difference than we expected. So we need a PhD student to necessarily study this and explain it for us. But the blue line here is in the lift, and the orange line is in the sink, and then the red line is what came from our balloon. Us involved, they're very good at
PR.
publicity, so we've made several front covers. 2018, they documented articles and TV shows and stuff. They had an audience of like 1.5 billion people. And they say that is equivalent to like 5 billion impressions. So the flight in 2018 officially is the highest piloted subsonic flight. And it's the highest by a civil airplane. And our goal is to get the flight level 900. So we're raising some more funds to go back this next year. Some items for your bucket list. Visit our website, perlanproject.org. If you've never flown a sailplane, you should give it a try. I mean, it's pure piloting. And of course, Patagonia is worth a visit. And with that, I'd entertain any questions you all might have. Yes, sir.
You were in that cockpit without a pressure suit.
Yes, sir.
Wow. Now, you can't do that in the United States. The FAA has a rule that 50,000 feet, you have to have some other pressurization. Is that right? Am I correct?
That's no
I
enough.
don't think so. Is it in Spaceship 2? They're not wearing pressure suits. Spaceship 1, they didn't.
Must
wear
be,
pressure
It's a pressurized
I think that's
aircraft.
military now.
I guess.
Yeah.
It's a military rule. The difference is, again, we have a safety factor of 3 in the design of the cabin. They do the same thing with any spacecraft. So what you're trying to do is minimize the chance of failure. And your wing spar is designed for 150% safety margin. Yes, sir.
I may have missed it, but did you have any way of measuring rads on radiation at those altitudes?
We're carrying dosimeters, and we have a radiation sensor. As you'd expect, it's increased radiation level. But given the short duration of exposure, it's not an issue for us. Yes.
I know you did some vibration tests on the way up, and also you did some on the way down, right?
Correct, yes.
But that your airspeed was higher on the way down. Did you ever have anything that started to go divergent or look like it was gonna do something?
So far, all of our in-flight tests have shown that the structure has damping better than or equal to the forecast.
That's good.
Yes, yes.
So have you had to do any modifications to the plane as a result of these tests from one year to the next?
Yes, the first year, we discovered we didn't have enough heaters, so we added some heaters to some of the systems on the airplane. The original hatches didn't fit perfectly, so we built a second set of hatches, so the hatches fit much better. Little mods like that.
Nothing structural.
We added an emergency oxygen system a year ago.
Nothing structural, no weights to stop vibrations or anything like that?
No,
So we're
no,
fine.
no.
Are flight controls just linear all the way up, or do you have some modification of the higher Mach number that, or is it just you, all you?
Interesting question. In terms of aircraft response, that's really a function of indicated airspeed unless you start getting shock waves on something. So the feel of the airplane, the stick forces and so on are pretty similar at sea level and higher altitude. The airplane does roll much better at high altitude because the true airspeed is so much higher and the roll damping is less. At very low altitude, like on tow, in turbulence, the stick forces are high enough. I end up using two hands to make large inputs. But so the stick forces are a little bit less at altitude. The Dutch roll damping, which is a dynamic mode that occurs if you excite the airplane laterally. The Dutch roll damping is very low at altitude, but the period is like 8 to 10 seconds. So if your pilot's in the loop keeping the wings low, it essentially damps Dutch roll.
Any PIO at all?
No.
Not like the road and the ASK?
I suppose you could excite them,
But you're a low gain
but
pilot?
I'm low gains.
And tell a little bit about weight,
Yes.
the effect of that. I see you have a lot of extra stuff on board, so like cameras and experiments and did you do the flutter sweeps on the data points you were coming back down? Was that downlinked or did you just record it on board and look at it afterwards?
We downlink all of it. It's just physically easier to do the high-speed points on the descent because you're using altitude to dive into the
But
point.
they just stick wraps?
We're doing stick wraps, and then the flutter exciters, they got electric stepper motors, so we can excite the wingtips symmetrically and asymmetrically from 2 to 30 hertz. We normally just do a 30-second sweep, so it starts out at 2 hertz and it just keeps sweeping faster.
So you do a sweep, downlink, they look at it on the ground and carry it for the next faster?
Yes.
Okay.
And in fact, what we're doing is we're emailing the file to ATA in San Diego, and they're running it through their computer. It takes about 15 minutes. So it's 15 minutes between the test points.
Yeah, but the fact of weight on the airplane, the altitude.
Interesting question. In the U-2, each pound is worth what, 1.5 foot or so in altitude? In the glider, because we're climbing because of the air motion, as long as you have the strong lift, the weight doesn't really hurt us. So if you add a couple pounds, the sink rate goes up slightly, but our nominal sink rate at sea level is about 100 feet a minute. Now it goes up as the true airspeed goes up. So you get to high altitude, you're talking maybe 600 feet a minute at 90,000 feet. But we're seeing lift rates well over 1,000 feet a minute. So the air is going up so fast in these strong waves that the weight, it reduces our climb rate slightly, but it does not inhibit our ability to climb. The atmosphere is absolutely amazing.
JP, you mentioned that the temperature differences in the rising and sinking air were one of the things that you've discovered that doesn't match theory. Have you discovered any other atmospheric phenomena that there's some head scratching about? And this is one of your goals, is to learn more about the upper ends.
The ozone data that we have collected conforms to theory. Basically, there's none in the tropopause. You get in the stratosphere, it starts getting bigger or more and more ozone as you climb higher. Let's see. But, except for the temperature, there hasn't been a big surprise yet.
Say, Jim? One of the things we discovered was the balloon, radio soundings. On the really good days, the rise rate of the balloon just deviates enormously as the balloon drifts downwind toward the coastline of the Atlantic. And what's amazing is it's like the whole atmosphere well downwind of the Patagonia is like resonating with these stratospheric waves, and it just gets stronger and stronger the higher you go up. And by the way, it is verified by satellite imagery in other cases that show these gravity waves just amplifying as they go up to 200,000 feet.
You can see that often on the satellite photos of from New Zealand that wave clouds are extending 200 or 300 kilometres downwind from offshore.
Yeah, you mentioned that you're trying to get over 100,000 feet in the future, is that correct?
We have to build a different airplane.
Okay.
This particular sailplane is designed to go, as I said, to 90,000 feet with a
Right.
little maneuvering margin. When they first started designing it, Inner said 100,000 is a really nice number. Let's try it for 100,000.
Yeah.
But when one of the constraints is they kind of know that a lot of competition gliders have a 82 to 85 foot wingspan, so you know what the flying qualities are in a glider that size. So that's kind of how they picked this 25 and a half meters wingspan.
Okay. Can you talk to the new sailplane you're trying to design or modify, I guess, to get to that point, or?
We haven't really done a large preliminary design. You really have two choices. You either have to have lower wing loading so the stall speed is lower, or you need to have an airfoil that tolerates supersonic flow. The trouble is when you start getting sonic flow, the drag goes up. So you're probably not going to be able to climb. A supersonic airfoil, supercritical airfoil, has kind of a flat top on it. That's probably not going to work very well at low altitude. So you have all kinds of design constraints.
You also are trying to keep it inside a 40-foot container at the moment.
Exactly.
There's that.
And if you have lower wing loading, now you have trouble with ground handling. Typically on a good wave day, you're going to have strong winds on the ground. So if you have an airplane, say with a stall speed of 25 knots, and the winds on the ground are 25 knots with the crew in it, take the crew out, now it's probably going to fly at 23 knots. So now you have problems safely moving it around on the ground.
What was the quick Mach number again?
0.62.
0.62. That's because of the thickness of the airplane?
Yes.
Is there no equivalent place in the northern hemisphere during our winter to attempt this?
Well, excellent question. Can we do this in the northern hemisphere? The answer is yes. They say because Antarctica is colder than the Arctic, the polar vortex is probably 40% stronger in the southern hemisphere. One advantage to the southern hemisphere is if you fly from Argentina and you go all the way around the world, Argentina at that latitude is the only landmass. And the effect of the ocean is to keep the surface layer of the atmosphere warmer. So when we're at El Calafate, typically the highs when we're there in August are in the mid to high 30s, and the lows are in maybe the high 20s. So for us, we're dressing for cold at altitude and stuff. Those are temperatures that are easy to work in. Up in the northern hemisphere, the northern Canadian Rockies, the Ural Mountains, the mountain range between Norway and Sweden, those are all potential sources of stratospheric wave. The problem is in the winter when those waves are working, it might be like minus 40 on the ground, so you really have ground handling problems. But we're still looking into potentially maybe going to the Canadian Rockies and give it a try if we can line everything up and have enough funding. But that's kind of a dream at this point. Yes, sir.
Yeah, with your experiments with the students, were they from our local schools here or from all over the country or France?
From all over the country. There's a group called Teachers in Space which is based on the East Coast. So because Teachers in the Space is in that area, a lot of them have come from the East Coast. There's one from Puerto Rico. We've gone out of our way to create goodwill with the Argentines. So we've carried some CubeSats that an Argentine university built and helped them out.
Did you have any kind of yaw damper?
We have a yaw damper. We had one, but the company that sold it wouldn't tell us the equations of motion inside, so we couldn't analyze it. We are working on another one, but because the period is so long, we may not need it.
Yeah.
So,
If you do need it, I know somebody that can build it.
oh, I'll see you after the meeting.
They're really good.
Okay. Thanks, Dick.
Here's a question.
I noticed that the U2 has a very small window of operating between stall or high-speed stall or whatever, when you fall out of the sky. What about this? Does this have a more comfortable range? Because you're at altitude, right?
Yes, because our wing loading is much less than the U2, we can go to 96,000 feet before the VNE and the stall come together.
Okay.
And we limit ourselves to 90, so a little bit of maneuvering room. If we gain much more weight, of course, the altitude's going to come down a little bit because the stall speed would be higher. But you're right, the U2, they have an advantage, they don't turn very much, so that they can get closer to their coffin corner because they're flying straight.
Okay.
Well, I'd like for Jackie to come up. I've got a little gift for you. You've got a plain crazy hat, you have shirts, and I thought, what can I give these people? Well, we've been talking about the U2 flying high, so I've got a commemorative bottle of wine
Look at that.
with the label of the
Of
U2
the
celebrating
U2 on it.
the
Okay.
65th anniversary.
Oh,
Because
very
I started
nice.
designing it in 1955. And so this is a bottle of Chardonnay. I would go with turkey dinner.
Okay.
So anyway, come over here, Jim, and I've got 2 Voyager glasses, another aircraft with very long wings. Didn't fly high, but it flew a long way. It took off at Edwards and landed at Edwards.
We were there.
I was there
Jim-
too.
Jim was on, we were on the runway,
Taxiway.
on the taxiway there at Edwards, and we had our 3-year-old and our 5-year-old there. We had a sign, you never saw it, and it said, Bon Voyage.
And Dick Rattan is here, and of course he flew Voyager around the world. So,
Kathy?
yes.
Smile, everyone.
Okay.
Okay, 1, 2, 3, there we go. Thank you.
Thank you. And if somebody could send me a photo. Okay, thank you, thank you.
Thank you, Jim.
Indeed, indeed. And enjoy life. Thank you so much for this presentation. We've asked Jim now, I think, 3 different times to come and talk about Perlan. And what year was it? Was it last year or the year before maybe? You brought Dennis Tito with you. Or he brought you, actually, in the Mustang, the
Citation.
little jet, yeah,
That was
yeah.
probably in 2016.
Yeah, in 16. So that was really neat. I want to let you know, we do this every month, the 3rd Saturday of every month, rain or shine, holiday or not a holiday. And next month, on the 21st, we will have Dick Rattan introducing his new book. So you don't want to miss that. And this is, as Dick remembers it, the title is The Next 5.
The next 5 minutes. I
The
wonder
next
what the
5.
next 5 minutes of my life is going to be like.
On the runway at Edwards, in the Voyager, ready to give it the power. Wonder what the next 5 minutes are gonna be. And as you remember, watching that, and the wings going down, and it's, wonder if he's gonna get off the ground, and oh, he got off the ground, yay! Oh, part of the wing is, yeah, the winglet's coming off. anyway, it was an exciting flight from takeoff to landing. So, but he talks about other things in the book too. Some of your Vietnam experiences. Yeah. And it was fun for me today just to sit in the Voyager, and everybody that came in was a Vietnam vet. One was in the Marines, and one was in the Air Force, and Dan Yost is here. He flew Caribous in Vietnam, and Jimmy Doolittle flew A-1 Sky Raiders, Sandys, and Dick flew F-100Fs. And then there was a Marine out there that was in artillery. So, yeah, pretty neat just to sit there and listen to their stories. So, thank you all for coming. Thank you, Jim. Good luck with